Andrea from Lemoore, California, and you're watching Gospel Tangents, your best source for Mormon history, science, and theology.
I'm Rick Bennett. Historian Dan Vogel has said the Book of Mormon is an anti-Masonic book. However, in our previous interview with Cheryl Bruno, she disputed that idea. I'm going to ask the same question to Clair Barrus. Where does he stand? You won't want to miss this conversation. Check it out. Hey, I just wanted to mention one other thing. Beyond the Blocks is an awesome podcast, and it seeks to center the narratives of the marginalized in conversations on Mormonism. A Black lifelong member and queer theologian, Brother Jones and Brother Knox, seek to fill the gaps between Mormon theology and Mormon culture that find all kinds of identities may claim a seat at the table of Christ. So check out Beyond the Block. It's a great podcast. Now back to our conversation. We've got some Masonry going on at this time. Is that right? How do we tie Masonry in with all this sort of stuff? Or is it not?
Yeah. So let's back up to Oliver Cowdery. So we talked about the New Israelites. That disbands. William Cowdery then gets involved in Freemasonry. And we have a few records that give us some very interesting clues. So he became a member of a Mark Masters Royal Arch Lodge, is what it's called. And in there we have records that he was for a while, a master overseer, and then later a junior warden. And so in a Royal Arch Lodge, the master overseer, in the ceremonies, the initiate who's going through the ceremony, they come to what's called the third veil, and they've learned some signs and tokens. In fact, one of the tokens has to do with a rod, interestingly enough. And then they go presumably to William Cowdery, Oliver Cowdery's father, and they give him the right signs and tokens, and he lets them through the third veil, and then they go into the Grand Council. That's what it's called. Now, William Cowdery's father then later gets promoted to junior warden. As the junior warden of a Royal Arch Lodge, plays the part of the third member of the Grand Council. And so as the third member of the Grand Council, he would be the prophet scribe. It was the scribe, but it was I think in mimicking, it might have been Haggai or one of the prophets that was a scribe. And so there's a high priest, a king, and a scribe. So interestingly, Joseph Smith ends up spending a lot of emphasis on prophet, priest, and king later in Nauvoo. Well, in the Masonic Royal Arch ritual, we have prophet, high priest, and we have a prophet, scribe, high priest, and king, which is interesting. The Grand Council is at the end of the Royal Arch ritual. They talk about that someday we will. The initiate that's going through the ceremony will go into the Grand Council in heaven, that they'll pass through the veil in heaven to the real, true heavenly Grand Council. And they call this the ceremony of exaltation, which is interesting. So we have a few Mormon-y words. We've got
or Masony, right?
Masony, or Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saint-y words. We
can't use that anymore.
Yes, I'm trying to correct that. Sorry, I get carried away sometimes. We have Grand Council, which later, I think Joseph Smith uses Grand Council as the council in the pre-existence. And then, of course, exaltation is something that is on top of salvation. It's the celestial kingdom objective. And it's interesting that we have this terminology in the Royal Arch Masonic ritual. Also, so you've got and we'll talk a little bit more about the ritual. While I'm thinking of it, let me mention that the head of a Royal Arch Lodge can go into it, and I ought to see if I can find this in my notes so I can get it right. It's the I don't know if I can find it, but it's the Order of Melchizedek which it's called, or the Holy and Anointed Order, something like that. And if you want, I can thumb through my notes.
Sure.
Okay.
So here's where I'd like to go. So it's interesting to me that you are telling me that Warren Cowdery and Oliver Cowdery were involved.
William Cowdery.
Just William, not Oliver?
Not all. Yeah, Oliver was not involved in Masonry at this point. Later, he becomes a Mason. We don't know when he first became a Mason. It was probably after he fell out with Joseph Smith. There's a very slight, very slight chance that he could have been one before Joseph Smith, but it seems unlikely. It's kind of a stretch. But the age, we don't know when he became one. But later, he helps organize a lodge. And so, which suggests he had some Masonic experience because he's immediately a lodge officer.
What year is this lodge?
This is going to be in the 1840s, somewhere I think after Joseph's death.
And just to remind people on kind of the time frame. So Oliver's the second elder on April 6, 1830. Joseph's the first, Oliver's the second. So by 1835, we have an issue where he accuses Joseph of adultery with Fanny Alger, or Alger. I don't know how you say her name anymore. Brian's messing me up.
Yeah, Alger, or Algers,
or Alger. I heard Alger too. Yeah.
Either with or without an S.
Yeah.
So there's four possible pronunciations.
So at any rate, so we look at Fanny as being the first first plural wife after Emma. Emma catches him in the barn. Anyway, I need to talk to Don Bradley about that. But so Oliver accuses Joseph of adultery with Fanny. Joseph denies the charge, and Oliver's excommunicated. And I believe this is 1835. Do you know?
Or 36, or 36. Somewhere in that realm, 36. I believe.
So Oliver's out of the church, is excommunicated. So it's William, his father, was into Masonry, but we don't have any evidence that Oliver was doing Masonry at this time. So this is 1840, and that's about when Joseph was doing it. But Oliver doesn't join the church until long after Joseph dies, right?
Right. So sometime in the interim, after he gets kicked out, and sometime in the mid-1840s, I think after Joseph Smith has been murdered, Oliver shows up organizing a Masonic lodge, helping to organize a Masonic lodge. And he is an officer in the lodge.
Well, and I'm trying to see if there's a connection, because it sounded to me, but maybe I was reading things into it, but it sounded to me like you were trying to make a connection between William Cowdery and Masonry and Joseph Smith, but it sounds like there isn't really a connection.
Yeah. William Cowdery, Oliver's father. I'm saying that Oliver grew up under William Cowdery, and William Cowdery was heavily involved in Royal Arch Masonry and was involved in these rituals. And then, not only that, but then they moved to a town that I can't recall in Vermont, and Jeremy Cross shows up in town. And Jeremy Cross, while he's in this town that the Cowderys live in, we think that it looks like they may have overlapped, but they may not have. It's hard to tell. But he organizes the Cryptic Rite Masonry, which is a collection of degrees, while he's in the same town that the Cowderys possibly, at the same time the Cowderys are. It's possible that the Cowderys hadn't quite arrived, that they had left before he arrived, but it's during the same year. One group is coming in, the other one's going out, and it's hard to tell how much overlap there was. Okay. But anyway, there's a possible overlap of Cryptic Rite Masonry. William Cowdery was absolutely into the esoteric. He's a member of the Rodsmen of the New Israelites. He's into Masonry. He's gone through the craft Masonry, the first 2 degrees, and then he becomes a mark master, and then he goes into Royal Arch Masonry, and he becomes an officer in that. So he's pretty steeped in that. Oliver's growing up. Oliver's uncle is also involved in Masonry, and so then, the point is, it may or may not have filtered to Oliver, and it may or may not have filtered to Joseph Smith.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to see.
It's just interesting that he's involved, but it does help tell the story. Whether or not there is a transmission of information to Joseph Smith is either neither here nor there. It's helping to tell the story of Royal Arch Masonry, but it's fun to tell the story with William Cowdery as a player within that.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
So, one of the things that Dan Vogel claims is that the Book of Mormon is very anti-Masonic.
Mm-hmm. And
so, but yet in the 1840s, Joseph Smith is embracing Masonry.
Yes.
So do you agree, number one, that the Book of Mormon is anti-Masonic?
Well, I have the benefit of having listened to Cheryl on your podcast earlier, and so I'm cheating because I've heard her answer, and she knows more than I do. But I do know about this. There's two forms of Masonry according to George Oliver, who has some fascinating parallels with what Joseph Smith is Mormonism. And in that there's a spurious Masonry, and then there's pure Masonry. And the story goes clear back to the time of Adam. Well, God is the original Mason, and he architects the universe. And then he creates Adam.
So this is a Masonic tale that you're telling me right now?
This is a Masonic tale, yes.
Okay.
And then he creates Adam, and then he tells Adam the true word, the ineffable word, which is kind of the secretive name of God. He tells Adam the word, and it's called in Masonry the word, or the ineffable word. And then Adam passes that down, almost kind of like priesthood, passes it down through his genealogical lines, and it goes clear down to the time of Solomon, and they end up with it, and then they lose it. Long story short, the keeper of the word gets murdered, and they lose the word, and it's lost. And we'll talk about this word here in a bit. But Cain breaks off and creates a spurious, evil, bad, misappropriated Masonry. And he starts this line of kind of adulterated Masonry, spurious Masonry, if I understand it right. And I'm oversimplifying, and I hope Cheryl's not shaking her head going, oh man, Claire's kind of got it right. But I'm kind of, this is not my area of expertise.
When we post this, she can weigh in on it.
She can weigh in on it, yes. But that's generally speaking correct. So now you go to you go to the story of William Morgan, 1826. He is going to publish an expose of Masonry. The Masons supposedly freak out. William Morgan goes to jail in Canandaigua, just a few miles south of the Smiths. Joseph Smith Sr. happens to be serving time there for some debt. I think it's debt-related issues, and then later the Masons bail out William Morgan. When he steps out of jail, they arrest him. They take him up to one of the Great Lakes. They toss him in. So the story goes. We don't know the details, but this is kind of the story that percolates out. Well, then the whole nation freaks out about anti-Masonry, and they start, and they have an anti-Masonic convention in the very first one in Seneca, New York. That should ring a bell. That's over by where the Whitmers are hanging out. This is before the church is organized, but this is maybe 1827. I'd have to check, but it's right in that time frame. And then anti-Masonic conventions start popping up all over the place, and they're calling Masonry secret combinations, is a term commonly used. And in fact, that's showing up in the paper in Palmyra, the word secret combinations being associated with Masonry. Well, this word also shows up in the Book of Mormon, secret combinations, to talk about these secret oath-bound groups that are using their secretiveness to get gain and to and to damage the government. And so at the same time, there's a big Andrew Jackson is running for president, and so he's a Mason, and I'm hoping I'm getting these details right. I'm getting them close. He's running for president, so his opposition is like, well, hey, he's a Mason. Holy crap, you can't vote for a guy like that because he's bad news, And anyway, this Masonic fervor, anti-Masonic fervor, spreads into politics and into the election, and so it's huge, and the whole nation's freaking out. They're thinking that Masons are controlling the government, and that it's You think we got conspiracy theories these days in politics? Well, it was really bad back then too.
Well, yeah. Well, the thing that always bugs me is because our founding fathers were Masons, and so George Washington was a Mason. I believe Thomas Jefferson was a Mason. Like, everybody was a Mason. The Constitution used a lot of Masonic principles, and so it's interesting that in 1791, when George Washington is the president, until I don't remember exactly the year that Andrew Jackson was elected, probably 1828, I believe, somewhere around there, in that time frame. So we go from the founders of our nation are good Masons to this William Morgan murder, and now they're public enemy number one.
Right. And it was an overreaction. Sure, these Masons were upset about William Morgan trying to expose their Masonic secrets, but the overreaction was bad. That happens in the world all the time. Overreaction is often worse than what they're originally reacting to. So in the Book of Mormon, you have this anti-Masonic stuff popping up. There's two ways to interpret it. It's either anti-Masonry or it's anti-spurious Masonry, right? And I don't know how to make that distinction. Yeah, we've got good Masonry
and bad Masonry, essentially, right?
Yeah. And Joseph, and it's I don't know if it's which one it is. I just don't know. But there is anti-Masonic terminology in the Book of Mormon, and it's portrayed as and then immediately after the Book of Mormon is published, the Book of Moses gets translated, and the story picks up. And Cain, between the Book of Mormon and the Book of Moses, Cain is the original Master Mahon. Okay, so you take an H and you turn it to an S, and you have Master Mason, and you've got these oath-bound secrets, and you have killing to get gain, which is what they thought the Masons were doing, and so you have this evil personified in the Book of Mormon and the Book of Moses, which is a very curious parallel to what's going on in the national paranoia anti-Masonic fervor. I mean, it's a curious parallel, which seems to suggest that well, it depends on how you look at the Book of Mormon. But if you think it was some of that came from the ideas in Joseph Smith's time, then there's a good case to say that Master Mahon and Master Mason are kind of talking about the same thing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with historian Clair Barrus. In our next conversation, we're going to talk about some Masonic legends that sound very similar to a famous movie I'm sure you've heard of.
And some people come going through the temple rubble, Masons, and they find a stone lid, which is the lid that Enoch had created, which is the entrance to the cryptic temple. They open up that stone lid, and they descend down into there, and there they find the Ark of the Covenant, which is and there's actually 9 chambers in this underground temple. And the Ark of the Covenant, so there's a missing piece of the story. We don't know how the Ark got in there, but it does. And this ought to sound familiar to Indiana Jones fans.
I was just going to say, yeah.
Yeah.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please subscribe to patreon.com/gospeltangents. And for just $5 a month, you can hear the entire interview without any interruption. If you'd like a paperback version of our transcripts, go to Amazon.com and do a search for Gospel Tangents Interview. Also, if you'd like to give the money to me and not Amazon, please subscribe on my website, and I'll be able to send you a transcript as soon as they are completed, and click the subscribe button. You can also find our latest information on Facebook.com/GospelTangents, as well as we're on Twitter @GospelTangents. And don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts. The link is at tinyurl.com/gospeltangents, and you can subscribe there. Also, please give us a 5-star review. If you want to support all of the podcasts as part of the Dialogue Podcast Network, go to lyceum.fm, that's lyceum.fm, and do a search for Dialogue Podcast Network or Gospel Tangents, because, that's a pretty cool one too. Thanks again for listening. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here we've got some of our great videos. Thanks again.